I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. This is our Friday edition, and we call it the Healing Circle. I'm pleased to have my co-host today, Ted Thompson, who is one of the leaders, the therapist involved in the work of the African American Child Wellness Institute, and of course, my niece, Lily Rankin, our resident youth expert. And Lily, so good to see you. How are you both doing?
Doing well.
Doing great.
Good, good. Let me turn my volume up here. Last week we talked a little bit about Keith Ellison, Attorney General Keith Ellison's concern that the judge in the trial of Derek Chauvin, Judge Cahill, Peter Cahill, entered into the record comments that sort of diminished the idea that the Black children who were witnessing the murder taking place on 38th in Chicago, that those children were not suffering trauma. And it's important because of the four reasons the Attorney General prosecutor asked the court to consider in determining whether it should depart upward from the state's sentencing guidelines. One of them was that a crime was enacted or carried out in front of young people, as this one was, and the presumption was that they would be traumatized by it. Well, so Keith Ellison, Attorney General Ellison, has written a letter to Judge Cahill asking him to revise his comments, his notes, his commentary for the reasons not to change the sentence, but to revise his commentary around how he looked at the sentencing and the decision or the question or consideration of whether trauma was experienced by these children. So let me start by Ted reading a little of the article that was in yesterday's paper. There's another one, a newer one in today's paper. With what I'm going to read now is entitled "Judges Asked to Change Trauma Wording in Chauvin Memo." This is by Steve Karnowski of the Associated Press, and it appeared yesterday in the Star Tribune, I think. Yeah. So the Dateline's Minneapolis, it says prosecutors have asked the judge who handled former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin's murder trial in George Floyd's death to rewrite his sentencing order to delete suggestions that child witnesses did not suffer trauma. Attorney General Keith Ellison, in a filing released Thursday, stressed that he is not seeking any change to Chauvin's 22-and-a-half-year sentence, but he asked Judge Peter Cahill to revisit the document to remove suggestions that 4 girls who witnessed Floyd's death and testified at Chauvin's trial weren't traumatized by what they saw. He cited research showing that children process trauma differently from adults, and that adults tend to discount the impact of trauma on Black girls. Open quote, discounting the trauma of the children who testified at trial, in an authoritative judicial opinion no less, will only exacerbate the trauma they have suffered, Ellison wrote. The court should correct the public record to avoid that result. I'll read a little bit more, and then I want you to respond to it. Ted and Lily, you can weigh in as well. And if those of you who are listening on Facebook or YouTube want to weigh in, we'd love to have your comments as well. We're monitoring the YouTube and the Facebook Live channels, and we want you to be a part of this conversation. So the article goes on. In his written analysis, Cahill noted that he had previously found aggravating factors that allowed him to sentence Chauvin to 10 years above the presumptive penalty under state sentencing guidelines. 2 factors justifying a higher sentence, he wrote, were Chauvin's abuse of his position of trust or authority as an officer and his treating Floyd with particular cruelty. Cahill also wrote that the presence of children at the scene, while an aggravating factor, didn't justify, did not justify a longer sentence. He agreed with the defense that the girls were free to leave at any time and said the prosecution's evidence didn't establish that they had been traumatized. He noted that two were seen smiling and laughing as officers kept Floyd pinned down. But Ellison noted that Darnella Frazier, who shot a widely seen social media video of Floyd's demise, broke down crying on the stand, while Elisa Unari testified that she had been unable to return to the scene ever since. This evidence supports a common sense conclusion, uh, Ellison said, after they witnessed a brutal, uh, minute long murder committed by police officers, the children suffered trauma. So the article goes on. There's a newer article in today's Tribune. The headline is AG Wants Rewrite of Chauvin Memo. And the subhead says Ellison says the trial judge unfairly dismissed trauma of four young witnesses. That story is written by Chao Dong in today's Tribune. Well, I want to begin with that. We talked about this a little bit last week, Ted, but let me ask you, as a therapist and a practitioner representing the work of the African American Child Wellness Institute, what's your impression of the discussion, the debate, and how is it that the court is dismissing the idea that these children were traumatized by watching a murder? I mean, how can that be? Ted Thompson, I'm passing the talking stick to you.
Thank you, Al. Can you hear me?
I do.
Okay. This is very disturbing. We know from lots of research that children are very definitely impacted by the experiences that they have, both positive and negative. We know that the auditory tract, we know that the visual tract, we know that the olfactory tract, um, they record the experiences of individuals. And because the brain is developing at young ages, these recordings in the hippocampus, these recordings in the memory are very deep set. We know that when we look at information from family violence issues or from domestic abuse issues, violence related to adults toward children, we know that these incidents have long-term consequences which alter the perception of the individual. So not only is their perception of themselves altered, but their perception of the world around them is also altered. In other words, there's an interpretation that we always make within experience, and that interpretation is long lasting. So it alters the way we literally view social situations or the beliefs that we hold about the way the society operates. So these are very long lasting issues. The fact that someone indicates that the children could have left, um, we know very clearly that if there is, say, an accident on the side of the road, humans are virtually compelled to witness.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Part of this is a defense mechanism to observe the danger before the danger gets to the person. So it is a sensory awareness which literally, even though you may be horrified by what you are witnessing, you are almost compelled to continue to witness the event, because what is going to happen next is part of what is compelling about the experience. So the idea that the children could just have walked away does not hold merit and validity according to the science and the research. The children also would feel discounted because they're witnessing the event, the importance of witnessing the event, their ability to retell the event, any kinds of images or nightmares or dreams that they have associated with the event. All of this is pertinent information which says that the event itself has a dramatic effect on youth, and it is long lasting.
And so, what is it in our society? This is discussed. I'm not sure if it's documented, but certainly discussed. I've heard it a lot. Our white culture minimizes Black pain, particularly pain of Black women or trauma of Black women. There is the sense that while there is maybe the mistaken notion of the fragility of white women, that there is a absolute diametrically opposed uh, uh, stance regarding Black women, and that Black women are capable, and Black people, but Black women in particular, are capable of bearing pain, or they don't feel pain and don't experience trauma, or that their concerns uh, in the area of pain and trauma ought not be taken seriously. And so, how can the court, or is the court's opinion in this case, are the statements in this case reflective of a larger societal view of Black and brown minds and bodies? What do you think?
I feel that it is. Unfortunately, this is one of the legacies of the history in America. This is one of the legacies in the social fabric related to the experience of slavery in America. And so basically, you have two issues. First, that during the time of slavery, individuals were seen as brutally strong in the sense of being able to survive the passage, number one, in the sense of being able to work the field, number two, in the sense of being able to bear more children for their involvement in slavery. So there were myths that were concocted or generated in relation to the strength not only of Black females but also of Black males. Um, and these are myths. We know that the pain suffered, the physical brutality experienced, these have deep seated wounds that unfortunately continue into today's social fabric. So this is a myth. And generally, number two, uh, it's a credibility issue. The experience of Black folks has been suspect whenever we speak of experience or pain. Um, and so when you think about the history, and I will go out on a limb and say this, I question whether or not the Chauvin trial would have actually occurred had it not been for the wisdom and the ability of the young lady who had that phone in her hand and was able to record the incident as it occurred. Um, if that recording had not existed, I honestly do not believe that the word of community would have been taken seriously, but the recording was undeniable. So the credibility of the experience within Black community has always been diminished, has always been denied. And part of that is simply because the greater, larger society has not faced the trials, tribulations, and abuse that communities of color have faced. So they don't have a way to connect with, recognize, acknowledge, or value what is being spoken by communities of color. And that that varies whether you're talking about the Native American culture, whether you're talking about the Asian culture, whether you're talking about the African American culture or the Latino culture. The experiences for these groups of people are different than the experiences of the majority culture, and they are given less credibility. That is a travesty.
Mhm. And so, and so, how should communities react? How do individuals react? Number one, for example, how does that inform a person like myself seeking medical care or seeking some kind of health intervention? If there's a sense that my description of my discomfort or dis-ease is not believed, that for some reason my ability to articulate, how I'm feeling in a way that is going to be believed. And really, it's not me. It's not my ability. It's them. It's
Yes,
their inability. So how do we deal with that as a culture? How do we change that? And I guess I'm saying that, do we have an obligation to work to undo the myopic uh, orientation of white reality, because it's not only hurting them, but it's hurting us as well.
I think we have to continue to speak. I think we have to continue to represent. I think we have to bring the message, the reality, the experiences, and this particular event, the George Floyd murder,
Mhm.
is a vivid example of the necessity of bringing the truth, bringing the facts, bringing the message to the forefront rather than accepting the implied truth of the majority culture that this is not important, this is not worthy. Uh, we don't need to deal with this. There are other more important issues. But the truth of it is, our experiences are important. Our experiences are valid. And we also need to help our young people with their sense of identity, which then helps them to feel entitled in representing, in speaking, in articulating so that their voices are heard. It is important to be heard. It is part of what makes the pain and the rage when people do not feel heard. So it is important to say to our young people, you have a voice, you have an identity, you are a person of value, and your voice must be recognized.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. Our Friday edition is called The Healing Circle. We do this in conjunction with the African American Child Wellness Institute. And my partners for today's program are Ted Thompson, one of the therapists and counselors with the Institute, our resident youth participant, Lily Rankin, actor, uh, studying to be a writer and editor with Inside News, interning with Inside News, and my colleague, uh, journalist and essayist extraordinaire, Brenda Lyle Gray. Before I bring other voices, I want to recap for those that are just joining the conversation again by referring to the article in today's Star Tribune. This is the article over the same material, but one written by Xiao Zhang, and the headline is AG Wants Rewrite of Chauvin Memo. And I'll read in the middle of it. It says that Ellison criticized Cahill for apparently dismissing the trauma suffered by the girls. Three were 17 and one was 9 at the time. The court should remove or modify the identified portions of the opinion, Ellison wrote in a letter made public Thursday morning. Doing so will not in any way affect the defendant's 22-and-a-half-year sentence, but will avoid the risk of sending the message that the pain these young women endured is not real or does not matter, or worse, that it's a product of their own decisions and not, turn the page here, and not a consequence of the defendants. Cahill had written in his sentencing memorandum that the three girls smiled and laughed during the encounter. The three included Judea Reynolds, who was 9 at the time, and her cousin, Darnella Frazier, who was 17, and whose cell phone recording of the incident sparked the criminal case. The cousins had walked to Cup Foods to buy candy when they came upon the scene. Although the state contends that all 4 of these young women were traumatized by witnessing this incident, the evidence at trial did not present any objective incident of trauma. Cahill wrote, that's the judge. Ellison wrote that the girls were traumatized even if their behavior did not appear to indicate trauma, and that research shows a bias that casts Black girls in a more adult light. Frazier and Reynolds are Black, as was Floyd. The girls and many other bystanders watched as Chauvin knelt on Floyd's neck for 9.5 minutes while he begged for his life. Ellison included a letter of support from Dr. Sarah Vinson, a child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist from Atlanta. She wrote, as a Black girl, Frazier is at risk of having her actions interpreted through a lens that denies her vulnerability and attributes more advanced motives to her actions. She said, with adultification bias, there is a risk of minimizing the emotional and developmental vulnerability of Frazier and Reynolds. Furthermore, Frazier's ostensibly mature actions can be understood as an empathetically driven response to a tragic situation in which the youth should never have been placed. And so a great article. I think that from my point of view, there is a call to action. And the call to action is for conversations like this to take place throughout the community. I think around dinner tables, over the backyard fence, and our casual conversation, we need to be in Black community talking about why is it that our pain, that our trauma is not believed or dealt with or appreciated. You know, Ted, whenever there is an incident, could be a mass shooting or a fire at a white school, what you read in the paper is how, the social services and psychology community is mobilized to deal with the trauma of children. There's the expectation that children are going to be traumatized by whatever horrific event took place. Could be a fire, could be a building, gone awry, could be a shooting incident in the school. We've had so many of those. But we know from the reporting that whenever it happens, front and center, our institutions call for counseling for all the students and all of their families.
Absolutely.
And how can that be the case and the norm, while at the same time, here is Judge Cahill saying, oh, these 4 children watching a human being murdered over the course of almost 10 minutes is not going to have an impact on them, and that he should not consider that as part of the sentencing that he gives to Chauvin. So that's beyond me, but it points to the hypocrisy in the society from my point of view. Ted, what do you think?
I would agree entirely. It does point to the hypocrisy because you do see the difference, and this is part of what we have to bring forward. You do see the difference in the wording, in the support, in the context of the incident. You do see the difference in the wording, in the support, in the context of the incident. You do see the difference in the wording, in the support, in the context of the incident. You do see the difference in the wording, in the support, in the context of the incident. You do see the difference in the wording, in the support, in the context of the incident. You do see the difference in the wording, in the support, in the context of the incident. You do see the difference in the wording, in the support, in the context of the incident. You do see the difference in the wording, in the support, in the context of the incident. You do see the difference in the wording, in the support, in the context of the incident. You do see the difference in the wording, in the support, in the context of the incident. You do see the difference in the wording, in the support, in the context of the incident. You do see the difference in the wording, in the support, in the context of the incident. You do see the difference in the wording, in the support, in the context of the incident. You do see in the institutions that come to bear when there is travesty or tragedy or abuse within the majority culture, and yet you do not see the same systemic resources being brought to bear for communities of color. And so we do have to keep pointing out the difference in the treatment and asking the question, why is this the case? Why is there a difference in the way that communities of color are treated? Why was there a difference in the way the court system was treating people of color when we were talking about drug cases in the courts? Why is there a difference in the way the police address issues of minor violations of driving? So you have this slogan, driving while black. Why is there a difference in the way that medications are given within school systems to young people who are African American versus young people who are Caucasian? We have to keep bringing the inconsistencies to bear, demanding some kind of answer. And of course, we know, we have been talking about issues of violence, issues of police brutality, not for 1 year, not for 2 years, not for 10 years, not for 20 years, not for 30 years. We have been consistently recognizing and talking about police brutality when it comes to citizens of color for decade upon decade upon decade. And the list of people who have suffered at the hands of the police unjustly, so long, so long, not even enough time today to begin to name the names of all of the people who have been affected and their families and community. So this, I am not surprised that it happens within the American society, and yet it must be addressed and confronted continually.
I'm going to expand the conversation a little bit, not to leave this, but to broaden it. We've been careful to always try to address the question of COVID-19 and
Yes.
our community's response to it. I see all of these things as connected. One could say these are, different silos, but they connect in our body, in our minds and in our daily life. And so, I've been reading a lot about the emergence of the Delta variant. And the story I'm getting is that it's more virulent, it spreads more aggressively, it has greater impact on those that are impacted by it. Yet we still know that there are pockets of our community, African American and brown communities, that have lower vaccination rates and
Yes.
have been slower to embrace um, the vaccines, and
Yes.
in some cases still exhibit a kind of denial
Yes.
mentality by not following the protocols in public, masking, washing hands, social distancing, etc. Where are we as you see it right now, and what do we need to do to get our people to take this seriously? Because this is no less serious than the other issue we're talking about. Ted, what do you
Yes.
think? And then Brenda, why
Yes.
don't you jump in? And Lily, I want your comments as well.
I certainly could defer to Brenda and Lily if they wish to make a comment first.
Well, Brenda, jump in.
I don't know about the COVID-19. I'm tired of arguing with my daughters about taking the vaccine because they, again, still refuse. But I think
So why do your daughters refuse? What's their rationale?
Gianni said, "Mom, I just want to wait." And I said, "Wait on what?
Mhm.
To get sick?" Well, it hasn't been proven. Yes, it has. The hospitals are filling up. They're saying that this variant has steroids. It's that potent, and that it is going to start moving. And then I just finally said, God, they're grown, you know, and I'm just going to pray that they don't get sick. I don't understand it. I really don't. But Ted, can I get back to Al? Do you mind if I ask him one question
Oh,
on our
please, please, please
other?
do. Please go right ahead.
There were two things, Ted. Number one, what type of training do you think is going on with the country's police departments when they talk about the racism and the brutality and the history? When we talk about trauma, our young men just get nervous and just, you know, out of control when a police car comes behind them. And I keep wondering, what does Chief Arredondo say as a Black chief to a predominantly white police department about the mentality of the brutality toward our young Black men, especially? But then on the flip side, look at what we're doing to exacerbate their attitude about young Black men's attitude toward themselves. Dr. B says it all of the time. Are you acknowledging humanity of your own brother and sister? So that was one thing that I've been wondering about in police reform and everything. How do you train police officers to get that hatred out of their soul? My other question is, when school starts, what do we say to our children when we come into the classroom? Do we talk about their fears of COVID? Do we talk about the violence that they are experiencing? What do we say to them, or do we just jump right into material and let's get into the algebra and the non-history that's being taught? Those two things I have, and I've got to write about it. I'm doing some research on it. Al knows I'm not going to jump into any writing unless I've gotten the facts, and I'm not getting a whole lot of facts. I want to read the AG's articles, but I am concerned about what happens in September when young people, Lily's age, come into the classroom. How do teachers, which we have 87% who are white, address these issues with the kids and engage them and, want and kind of put in place the things that will help them see the relevancy of coming to school every day?
I'd like to take a moment to speak to your first point.
Okay.
I'm going to hopefully have Dr. Akansanya speak to the second point about addressing the children as they return to school in the fall. There are several ways of training an individual. And so what we have seen, we saw this in Charlottesville. We have seen this on a number of occasions. We've seen this in South Central. We've seen this in Baltimore. We've seen this in Washington, D.C., as the prior president cleared the square and made that statement in front of the church with the Bible
Upside down Bible.
Yes. So there is a military orientation, and the military orientation is for suppression and containment, which means that you go into a situation with the idea of suppressing and containing the situation. and you come in heavy-handed. Well, that is different than community policing. It's different. Um, when you bring armored tanks, when you bring armament that is for military engagement in war zones, that kind of approach within a neighborhood, in a community, sends a very different message. This is not my safety patrol coming to assist. This is a group of military activists to suppress, control, contain, and with a license to kill. The message is very different. And so
I still remember the National Guard going down the streets where Al and I played, going out to protect the white neighborhoods, and
yes,
those tanks are still in my mind, and I'm old. So
and
I can imagine what young people think. I mean,
yes,
they crumble when I mean, my daughters have gone through it, driving while black 6 times. They
yes,
have been in court. And I thought about what Dr. B said last week that just so bothered me about her Mercedes. She said, I got rid of my Mercedes, and then I went to court, and to contest my ticket, and most of the people that were in court were black contesting theirs. How
yes.
do we stop that? What do you say in training about that? I mean, it's unreal. And my daughters will tell me, my students will tell me, be great. I don't know why you're giving it any energy. They don't have to address it. They really don't. Of the 13 Minneapolis wards, and Zoe mentioned that last week, they're not getting drive-by shootings in 10 of the 13. And so why should they be concerned?
Power writes the rules.
I know.
That's a very important aspect. Power writes the rules. And so community has to come to an understanding. There is a reason to vote in America. There is a reason to understand who your politicians and representatives are. There is a reason to understand what laws are affecting you every day, because power writes the rules. You are either a member looking at the rule making, or you are on the menu as a result of being oppressed by the rules that you did not make. And so we do have to recognize that getting into position to assist, regulate, legislate in favor of more humane and civilian-oriented regulations and laws, that's part of being a citizen. And so when I hear young people who say they are able, age-wise, to vote, but they have no interest in voting, I begin to preach.
Yeah.
I begin to preach, because every vote which unites us from individual to collective is important in making the necessary change. And it's true, change does not happen overnight. And the status quo will fight against any kind of change, because we now have this new word, tribalism. We have this tribal kind of separation in the society. So I don't want to take up all the time, but there's some reasons why things are happening.
Let's come back to that. I want to acknowledge that among the listeners, Hennepin County Commissioner Angela Conley is weighing in. And Angela, thank you for watching the program. Thank you for your service. And we're talking about politics now, so it's right down your line. But you noted in your comment that most of the younger people you talk to refuse to take the vaccine shot because of lack of knowledge, and that they're following the wrong crowd. And they seem to be more concerned about image and partying than health and their own health and that of others. And you say that there's no concern until the problem is at their door. Angela, thank you for the comments. And let me bring a couple other voices in. We haven't heard from Lily Rankin yet, and Dr. B has joined us as well. But Lily, I wanted you to respond, first of all, to the range of things we've talked about. First of all, this question of the notion that the court uh, is saying that it didn't believe the young women who witnessed the murder of uh, George Floyd experienced trauma. How does that sound to you?
I'm so glad you asked. I've been waiting to answer my my 2 cents into the conversation. I know, and this is a fact, that post-traumatic stress disorder begins within 3 months of the events that the person has witnessed, especially in children. And so, for the fact of not only I was traumatized watching the murder of George Floyd on my television and on my phone and the internet access that I had, but parents and elders as well. Then how were not those children, like, how were they not traumatized for seeing it in person? And it baffles me that that judge believed that they had no feelings or traumatic backlash from that. And if post-traumatic stress disorder starts, and the symptoms can start at within 3 months, how would it not push over? It's been like a year, and so I believe that that is just baffling to me for him to even consider that. And yes, they could leave technically, but for him to say that is like, oh, when you're going on down I-95 or driving down a street, you see a car crash or someone get into a vehicle thing where it stopped, and you're backing up and you're like, what is all this traffic for? And you realize that there is someone in a crash, and it's because right after that you see the traffic go completely done. It's because everyone looks at it, seeing if people are okay. That's just what people do. You see, oh, something's happened. What happened? What could I do? How do they feel this way? How could I help? It's because it's just what humans have been like. That's how humans feel and how humans see life. And it's really funny because it's not just adults, it's also children that feel that way, and maybe even more. They don't understand it, and children being able to see something and take it in, um, it makes it even maybe +2, like if a parent is seeing something and they see it this certain way, then a child will take it from not only the feelings of their parent, but also the feelings from the whole entire event that happened. That's just some of my thoughts.
Let me ask you to talk about the question that Commissioner Conley raised up and that we've brought up too about where we stand with the COVID-19. And I don't want you to disclose your situation, but what are you hearing around people your age now that children 12 and up are available or are eligible to receive the vaccine? And to me, that means parents more than it means children, because the parents have to lead and decide that their household will be vaccinated properly. But what are you hearing among young people, people in your age group, about the vaccine? Brenda just said her daughters, who are in their 40s, are hesitant. And I'm wondering, what are you hearing in your teenage group?
So it depends on the group. Some kids are very eager to get it, and as soon as it was said, like 16, you can get it, they rushed out to get it, checked off boxes, sent other, because I have friends that have sent me stuff to be like, hey, if you can't get into some lists, I have some other places that you can sign up into. There are people actively trying to help with young people as my age and up down to 12, um, trying to help, including me. I have sent articles and people and places that will allow you to get it, and how it's died down so much that you can get a walk-in vaccine.
Hmm.
And so I've had to do that as well. But also there's people that are like, oh, I don't know what's in it. And I've personally had parents be like, oh, I don't know if you should get it. I've gotten it, and so have my grandparents. Like, speaking from the parent wise, I've gotten it, and my elders have gotten it, but I don't know if my children should get it because we don't know the after effect. And speaking of that from a point is also crazy and very separate thinking, because yes, you've gotten it and your mother might have gotten it, but you're speaking of your children, and if they're able and eligible to get it, I believe that that would be a very likewise thing to do, and let them get it, because even even if something was to supposedly go wrong with 1% of vaccines, it's not likely for your child or others to get it around you. And so that's just a little 2 cents that I have about the COVID-19 vaccine. I don't know too much about it. I mean, I've done my research and fair amount of it, but not enough to tell people to get it for sure and to do this and do this if it helps, which will help more with the community, especially since Delta is coming into play. Then I believe that you should get it, but that's just my beliefs.
Let me make a correction here and thank one of our viewers who's monitoring by Facebook or YouTube, Angela Conley, I refer to as commissioner, and she responds, correction, I'm not the commissioner, but a self-proclaimed advocate for the unseen communities and people with disabilities. So Angela, thank you for clarifying your identity, and thank you for being here. Most of all, thank you for your interest and your advocacy and your work. And I just celebrate you for the attention you pay to the health and well-being of our community and of humanity. So thank you so very much. Dr. B, let me shift the focus over to you. We've got about 5 minutes, 10 minutes left. Boy, it goes so fast. These programs go so quickly, but they are rich. And, every day I'm doing this, but every day, Brenda, I come away saying, this is absolutely essential. This kind of conversation, it's unscripted, and we're kind of playing off of each other and responding to each other and a situation, but it's absolutely necessary. And I say that we're modeling what ought to be happening at the dinner table, over the backyard fence, at the bus stop, places where we gather informally. Let's elevate the chatter to items that I believe are of consequence, that reflect that we're thinking deeply about our well-being, about our community, and about this whole question of justice, equity. Dr. B, I'm going to pass the talking stick to you.
Thank you, brother. I take the stick in. I'm just glad I was able to join for a few minutes, and I want to just kind of roll back to a couple of things. Sister Brenda brought out the idea about what's to happen in the schools and how do we expose children and talk about the to the information around COVID and actually their lives. And I really loved, as I always do, hearing Lily, because she is wise beyond her years. Honestly, I know there are a lot of wise teenagers, but I got to give it to the sister. She's wise, and your analogy of how people kind of gawk when they see a traffic accident, that the traffic is not stopped because all of them are in it, is because they have to see. And that having to see is how bad is it. And then when they go by that, other human questions come in, like, is it someone I know? Or is that like someone I know? That could be me. That could be my family. Every human being who sees something horrific has a part of them, if they're not sociopaths, they have a part of them that connects with another human being injured. So my question today is really about, how do parents and adults in general protect children? How do we keep them safe? So, from George Floyd being murdered in the very front of children's eyes, where they had to look at a grown man getting killed. And as a child, a grown person is big enough. A grown black man, not a tiny one, is getting murdered. Then they say internally, that could be me. What could I do? I'm just a kid. I'm much smaller than that. I can't be safe either in the world. So those kind of things scar them. And like Lily was saying about post-traumatic stress disorder, we know that in the first 30 days, we have what we call acute stress disorder. And if it lingers and lingers, where they are anxious, having trouble sleeping, where they're having flashbacks about the event, if they're having intrusive thoughts telling them what shoulda, coulda, woulda, and they just spend a lot of time engaged in that. They're crying unexpectedly with little or no provocation. All of these behaviors we saw on trial. During the trial, we saw the people giving testimonies all the way from the 9-year-old child up to the 61-year-old black man. Everyone was impacted. And those of us who witnessed it had what we call secondary trauma, because they were going, that could be me, that could be my friend, that could be my husband, that could be my son. So the fact that we connect with each other, and we're collectivists as Black people in general, when something bad happens to one of us, we all feel vulnerable. So my question remains, how do we protect our children? How do we keep them safe? Does society think that our children are worthy of protection? Are our children worthy of safety? Are they worthy? Worthy of us recognizing their pain and seeing it as equal to or more than, in terms of historical trauma that they see in white kids? So I think about that movie. I know y'all have seen it, A Time to Kill, when the lawyer went to explain about the little black girl who is savagely beaten and assaulted, and they threw her little body over the bridge and had done all sorts of horrible things, and he had them just to imagine that. And then he said on the end, the lawyer said, now imagine she's white. And the jurors were riveted. You could see them opening their eyes, because they could not see that humanity until they thought, that could be my child, that could be my niece, that could be my grandbaby. So today, Sister Brenda, when teachers go to school, the best ones will say, these are my kids. I didn't birth them, but I'm supposed to birth in them a joy of learning, a sense of respect, a sense of belonging, and a sense of hope. So teachers who talk about COVID will be the ones who talk about it in an empowering way. That and we should teach people that if you don't take that vaccine and that Delta variant hits you, you cannot just have problems from that situation where you think you survived it. It can go on for years and years and years afterward. And so we want people to understand that COVID is no joke. And children who want to go to games and hang out and do those things, they may have to drag their parents to get the shots, because the issue is that's messing up my livelihood. Mom, I need to get a shot so I can go to the games, so I can go to the parties. And so we have to listen to them, because they're wise, and they're wiser than we think they are. So that's all I got to say about it. But I appreciate seeing the connection between saving our children and protecting them.
Well, as always, the hour goes so fast and we are out of time. This has been a wonderful conversation. Ted Thompson, thank you for being my co-host and co-pilot today. Brenda, as always.
Glad to be here.
And Lily, keep up the great work. Good to see you. Great to hear your voice. And Dr. B, what a wonderful team we are. I'm Al McFarlane. We'll see you next week.
Queen Justice, where are you? Did they beat you up or no? Lock you on the ground, take the crown away from you?
Oh, Lady Liberty, red, white, and blue. Did they take your dignity with their bigotry? Teach you that you're born to lose.
Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. Better believe, roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough. We've had enough of all the rules you break. We've had enough of all the money you make. We've had enough, no more life at stake. We've had enough, this is a proclamation.
It's been 400 years and we're 400 late. Together we stand from state to state. Going back in time won't make America great. We need justice now, people won't wait.
Action, no more distraction. Every step we take, we gain traction. If it can happen to one, it can happen to all. United we stand, divided we fall. Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. Better believe, roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough. We've had enough of all the rules you were breaking. We had enough of all the money you were making. We had enough, no more life gets taken. We had enough, this is a proclamation. Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. Better believe, just roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough. We've had enough
Of all the rules you're breaking.
We had enough.
All the money you're making.
We've had enough.
No more life gets taken.
We've had enough.
This is the proclamation.
We've had enough. Trayvon Martin and Tommy Rice. We've had enough. Michael Brown and Eric gonna pay the price. We've had enough. Philando, Breonna, George Floyd. What? We've had enough. So many gone